Hey gamers, welcome to Vlog Matters 8. Today I want to talk about why failure is not failure, and I've come across this thought while doing the game story for the project I'm working on. What I did is I sat down and I typed out basically all of the backstory kind of that takes place in part of the game and part outside of the game, in terms of like what the characters' motivations are up to that point and their relationships with other characters and how that plays into what the climax of the game is. And while I was writing it, it felt pretty good. It sounded okay. I mean, it was just a quick, straight through, nothing with like dialogue, just major plot points and everything. And when I got done with it, I just wasn't like super happy with it. And I sat down and I read it out loud and read it a couple other times and thought about it after a couple days, and I really didn't like how it turned out. And I've got it actually right here. It's all typewritten. I'm using a typewriter actually to type this, which you'll probably hear about in future vlogs, to type the story. And I wasn't really happy with it because it wasn't true to the original idea of what this project is. And the timeline of this project was I had initially devised the primary plot points and the gameplay and stuff quite a while ago, and then I paused for a little while. I was still working on Don't Be Dinner, I think, at that point, and I was still considering what my next project after Don't Be Dinner was going to be, so I had developed part of the climax and the story and gameplay, and then I went and I started working on some other project for a while that I wasn't as happy with, and that's why I took that project, tossed it to the side, and kind of went back to the project I'm doing now. The way that this story turned out contained almost no elements from that original story. It still contains the same like inspirations and stuff that we have already talked about, and some of the other ones that I want to talk about in the future. But it didn't contain the themes and it still contained the same characters, I think, but it was pretty much the themes and the way the entire game kind of explained those themes and stuff. That stuff was completely gone in favor of this story that was much less about the main character and much more about the relationships between him and the other character and characters in the game. And I didn't like that. It came out really generic. It came out really different than what I wanted. And what I realized is that writing that wasn't a failure, because writing that made me remember, oh yeah, there's all this other stuff I wanted to talk about in this game and bring up, and none of it is in this draft. And I realized that because I don't like this draft, and that's the stuff that it's missing. And it's got some extra stuff that I don't like, and I realize I don't like that stuff because it's not related to the other stuff that I want to actually talk about. And that's kind of going back to that original project where I built, so much design, and then I went on to a different project and realized I didn't like that, so I went back and was like, yeah, this is what I want to build. I think that it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction, kind of. You kind of have it right away, and you don't know what it is necessarily at first. It's almost like a, like it's built into you, Like when you touch a, hot stove, you're like, ah, man, it's hot. Probably a lot more exaggerated than, oh man, it's hot. But it's that kind of feeling. It's that feeling of, this isn't right. Something's wrong with this. It's almost like an uncanny valley for your like artistic brain. Like you write this thing and it's just not what you want it to be, and you either can continue with that. I see it as like a branch, right? You can continue with that, or you can back up and say, okay, now I've been down that branch, I know what I don't like down there, how can I change this one? In my case, I can actually go and change what I'm doing because I'm writing this stuff. Making that decision, I think, is going to make the game stronger, and I think there's some developers that probably are out there that probably don't do that. They probably continue down the path, and you get to a certain point in the path and you're like, well, I've spent so much time here, I don't want to go all the way back there, because if I go all the way back there, I'm gonna have to redo all of those, footsteps going up to here. And I can't just cut right over to the other path because, paths go like this. Because there's so much difference between the two. And in my case, I'm still early in the design and story phase of it. And while the major plot points are the same, the whole feeling of the game changes when you change the themes in the story, because you're conveying a different message to the player. And I think that message is really, core to what you want to do in your game. And if you don't like a part of what you're doing in your game, especially if it's your own project, okay? I'm talking about like indie to indie here, right? We're talking teams that can control what they're doing at this point. And we're not talking about, okay, you're owned by Activision and Activision wants you to make this game and you have to go forward. So indie to indie, we're talking projects that we can control. We can control their scope, we can control, what we want in the games. I think there needs to be a focus, especially in the indie industry, on putting stuff in a game that you want to put in. And when you make a mistake and you have this failure, don't consider it a failure. Consider it something you can look at and change at that point. Don't get 100 days into your project building some game that you realize you just don't want to make anymore and go work on something else. I think there's a whole thing around this with choosing your first project and picking a project that you're going to stick to and stuff like that. And I think this kind of goes along with that, but I think you have to be aware of that when you pick that project. You can pick your pet project and still make mistakes in it. And if you don't fix and correct those mistakes, especially early on in development, you're not going to have fun building that stuff. And I am proactively going to do that because I want this project. This is my pet project. This is the project that I started subject matter games to make, okay? So I want it to be the project that, is kind of my big, this is what I want to make, right? I think there needs to be, it's a level of, it's almost a level of quality, because no one wants to put stuff in their game that they don't enjoy, that players don't enjoy, and that is not fun, right? And that leads to a lack of quality because you're not going to sit there polishing it forever, not forever, but for an extended period of time in order to make it the best it can be for a terrible thing, right? So you can sit there and work on it all you want, but if it's bad, it's bad. So stop. Take a look at what is wrong, take a step back, and then fix it, and then go forward. I don't think you should do it over and over and over and over and over. And at the same time, I don't think you should say, oh, I've gone back 5 times, I still don't like it, don't go back anymore. It depends on your schedule. I think it depends on what your goal is. In my case, my goal is less focused on schedule and more focused on getting the stuff in that I want in the game. And I probably just offended like every producer ever in the history of video games. But I think as an indie, that's something you get, with your title. I know I'm not full-time indie, so it's hard to say, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, go and just like not worry about schedule. Just go on your project. Obviously, that's a terrible thing to say, but I think at the early stages of a project where you want to determine where you're going forward with it, that's key when it comes to defining things like story and things like the correct path. So I'm hoping I'm taking the correct path. I don't know, I'm going to go over it tonight and do some revising of this draft. Probably write it completely from scratch and toss most of it out and do it all over again. But that's part of the fun of this, right? Creation, taking what's in our brains, putting it on the paper. Okay, enough chatter. I'll see you next time.